Okay, I've shaken off the rust in my new place with a couple of videos, and now it's time to dive a bit more in-depth into a particular topic. This time around, stealth and surprise. I see a lot of conversation on the internet about stealth and surprise in 5th edition. Lots of people have questions, and I think a big part of that is because, especially when this very fuzzy part of the rules, very flexible part of the rules in stealth meets combat, this very strict feeling, this very clean, hard part of the rules, there's a lot of gray area, and people want to know how to run that consistently. Players want to know what they can expect from the rules so that they can make the tactical decisions that they need to make in combat, so that they can make the kind of role-play choices that they need to make. They need to be able to predict what's happening to make meaningful choices. And when we have a whole bunch of gray areas, it's very important to have consistent guidelines on how you're going to rule things in these gray areas. I think stealth and surprise and combat, when all those come together, that can be a powder keg of weird decisions, and it's helpful to create a guideline so that we can get through that. And I think if we go over the rules for stealth and surprise and examine them carefully, we can find a methodology that works for us. I certainly have one that works for me. I think you can find something that works for you, that we can apply thoughtfully, purposefully, and consistently so that our players can make those kinds of tactical decisions confidently, and the game sort of acts like you would expect it to. And how we'll do that is I'm going to go over a quick summary of the rules so we're all on the same page about how stealth and surprise works by the book, by the text, and then I'm going to give you my conceptualization of those rules. And we're going to pull up a bunch of edge cases that have been trouble at a whole bunch of tables that I've seen. And I'm going to go over how we can use that conceptualization to make rulings on those edge cases. First, let's go over the rules for stealth, for how to become hidden. I'm not going to read you the text from the player's handbook, but the short summary of it is, if you are unseen and you are unheard, then you can attempt to become hidden. You make a stealth check versus an opponent's passive perception or an opposed perception check, and if you win them, haha, you are hidden. Sometimes it won't be necessary to call for a skill check to see if a character becomes hidden or not. Just like any other skill check, you're only going to call for it if there's a chance for success, a chance for failure, and consequences for each. And you can see my earlier video about that, but otherwise, just tell the player the character is hidden, or tell the character, no, hiding's impossible right now. But what is being hidden specifically? We want to be specific. Of course, we all have a general idea of what being hidden means, what stealth means, and being unseen, etc. But we want to put into terms very concrete in our heads an idea of what being hidden means as a game mechanic, so that we can interpret that consistently as we rule on it in all these other scenarios coming up. For me, to be hidden means a character can say, I know where you are, but you don't know where I am. Being hidden also means, mechanically, that you get advantage on attack rolls against people who aren't aware where you are. So that's stealth and hiding. But stealth and hiding conversations often quickly become conversations on the surprise mechanic in combat, because the two are very closely linked. So let's go over the surprise mechanic as well very quickly. The DM determines at the start of combat who is surprised and who is not. This decision is made chiefly by looking at who is hidden from whom at the start of combat. If anyone is unaware of all their enemies, they are surprised. If they're aware of even one enemy, they are not surprised. Being surprised means that you don't get to take any actions or move at all until after you've had the first round of combat. It also means you can't take any reactions until you've already had your turn in combat. Surprise, I think, is a bit harder to conceptualize than being hidden. Nothing has changed about the character before and after the start of combat that made them surprised. They just don't get to have their turn until everybody else has had a go. And in that way, I think it's easier for me to conceptualize surprise less as a state of being and more as the ultimate initiative penalty. That conceptualization helps me a lot, and especially in these edge cases we'll go over later, and allows me to make rulings that make more sense for me. Real quick before we head into that though, the designers put in the player's handbook, in the stealth section, they reiterated the sort of base rules for calling for checks. And in fact, I did that too earlier in the video. And that was done on purpose, and I think it's very important for that to keep in mind while we go through these edge cases, because that's going to help us with a lot of these rulings. And even beyond all that stuff, keeping this in mind is going to help a lot as you move into the weird, crazy, kooky things that show up in your game. But let's get started. Case 1, a poorer perception performance than passive perception. We're going to cover this pretty quickly because I think I actually covered this in a previous video. But basically, sometimes people feel that it's weird that you can be on a lookout and guarding and keeping a careful eye, trying to find somebody out there and roll a 2 and do worse than your passive perception. The thing to remember here is that it's impossible to perform worse than your current passive perception. And in fact, as a DM, you don't want to call for a perception check if the passive perception could have hit it already. Just tell the player that that thing is there. And inversely, if a player does very poorly on a stealth check and your guard has a higher passive than their stealth check, you don't need to make an opposing roll. The guard just spots the player. Edge case 2, attack, hide, attack, hide. Another question that pops up a lot when talking about stealth, especially when it interacts with the rogue's cunning action, where they can hide as a bonus action. A lot of people go, well, doesn't that mean that a rogue can just pop out of cover, attack, use their bonus action to hide, pop out of cover, attack again, bonus action to hide over and over and over to get advantage on their attacks every single round? The answer is yes, that's what it's intended to do. Especially when you consider that by the rules, the only kinds of rogues that can do this attack hide thing are the ones that are using a ranged attack option, because if you were doing it from melee, as soon as you left where you were hiding, you would no longer be hidden, you wouldn't have advantage on your attack roll. So the sort of give and take is a rogue doing 2-weapon fighting is using their bonus action for a second chance at sneak attack, and at the very least a second chance at damage, and the rogue using their bow and arrow is only getting their 1 shot per turn, but they're getting it with advantage. Actually, that's a fantastic transition into our next case. Case 3, running up to someone from hidden. So speaking of the above, it is the case that when you leave being hidden, when you leave the cover of whatever you've hid behind, or the tree you were in or the fog you were occupying, when you leave that in order to run up and attack somebody from being hidden, you lose being hidden. Some people rule differently. They feel like if an enemy is engaged in combat, toe-to-toe with somebody else, or they're otherwise distracted in the opposite direction, so to speak, of where the person is charging out from being hidden, that they get to stay hidden and still get the advantage on that attack roll. Because remember, as a DM, you're totally free to say that, okay, he's distracted, you don't need to make a check to become hidden. That's part of the stuff that's specifically pointed out in those rules right there in the stealth section. In fact, that's how I rule it at my table. At my table, that's fine, but you make your own rulings depending on, you and your table's play style and what your players are expecting. Case 4, knowing where they hid. Another thing sort of related to the attack, hide, attack, hide, attack, hide scenario is, what if the enemy knows where you hid? If you're popping up from the same barrel and attacking them and disappearing behind the same barrel over and over again, shouldn't that negate the advantage of being hidden? The way to grapple with this is to engage with the base rules of making skill checks. The DM is fair to say, okay, well, in this scenario, there is no way to hide. I won't bother calling for a check, you just don't hide. Or for making it harder, giving you disadvantage or the enemy advantage on the perception check against you, or something like that. I normally don't make rulings like that at my table. That's just what's more fun for me and my players, is that they're able to grab that advantage where they can. I think it'd have to be a pretty extreme scenario, like a single barrel in the middle of a flat meadow, for my enemies to really know where someone's hiding. Because especially in the chaos of combat, it's easy to lose track of somebody and to never be entirely sure whether they hid behind the barrel or behind the really large barbarian or around that corner. Even if there's 2 places they could hide behind and there's any sort of uncertainty at all, that's going to keep my enemies from making whatever combat preparations they need in the middle of the fight to nullify the advantage from being hidden. Case 5. I don't know you're there, but I'm not surprised. So there is a hypothetical scenario. Let us say that you are a party of very stealthy rangers and rogues. You've all got bows and arrows, and you get the drop on a party of orcs. You've got them surrounded, and you all succeed on your stealth check. And you decide, we're going to attack. And the DM calls for initiative, and you all roll like crap. And one of the orcs rolls really well. His initiative is before you. So combat starts, the orc is surprised, it gets to his turn, he's no longer surprised, and then one of you gets to attack. That sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? There's absolutely nothing that has happened to be able to change the orc from being surprised to being not surprised. But this makes more sense if we think about surprise like we decided to earlier, our earlier conceptualization, where surprise is not a state of being, it's the ultimate initiative penalty. Just like there was no change in who he was as a person before and after everyone rolled initiative, there was no change in his person as a state of being. He wasn't filled with surpriseness when initiative was rolled and then emptied himself of surpriseness after his turn in combat. He was just surprised, and that took away his turn and his ability to act at that point. It was a penalty, not a state of being. He does get to take reactions, mechanically, from that point on forward in the round, which sounds a little weird, except when you realize that almost every reaction he could use in that scenario requires him to see his attacker. So he wouldn't be able to use anything that sort of breaks our understanding of the narrative anyway. The one exception being the spell Shield, but that is magic and might be therefore a bit easier to justify in any situation where this would potentially come up. Case 6. Surprising assassins. The other big question, sometimes just a strict complaint, about the surprise rules as they're written is they can sort of cheat the assassin out of their core class features. To go over it quickly, assassins get advantage on attack rolls against folks who haven't had their turn yet in combat, and they get critical hits on folks who are surprised in combat. And so, if you're hidden and you've got surprise and you're ready to critically hit these guys, but you roll initiative lower than everybody else in combat, it can sort of feel like your core class feature has been taken away from you with a bit of bad luck. Especially because you already have high dexterity because you're a rogue, so your initiative is probably normally pretty good. This doesn't happen a lot. Like I said, you've got high initiative, especially if there's a whole bunch of combatants, there's likely someone who hasn't taken their turn yet that you can hit, but when it does happen, it feels really bad. It feels especially bad if you've been like hunting your quarry down and doing everything you need to do to make sure you've got the assassination set up perfectly right, and then you go to strike and you roll a 4 and the enemy rolled a 9 in their initiative, and so you don't get any of your core class features against attacking them. This might be the only time that I think we should formally invoke Rule 0 and say that as the DM we have control of the game, we have control, ultimate say on how the rules go, and that's dumb and it makes it unfun for my players, and so the assassinate feature is going to work a little bit differently, and it's not going to exactly be the way as it's written. You might feel differently, your players might have a different playstyle, but in my case I want to reward the player for going through the effort to play the character to the character's strengths, and I don't want them to feel like a bad roll is keeping them from doing the cool thing that their entire subclass is all about. And I think I'll stop there for time. My goal with this was to demonstrate many different ways that you can grapple with weird things in the rules. Sometimes we just need to reframe how we interpret the state of the game into the narrative of the game, like with surprise. For some of them, we need to remember that the bedrock rules of the game still apply even in these weird edge scenarios, and we can use those to help us get through those scenarios, like when calling for stealth against a distracted enemy, etc. And if all else fails, we are the DM, and if the rules are not suiting the needs of our players, we're allowed to break them in the name of fun. See you next time. Yep. Hello everybody. Thanks for watching another video. This is another deep dive topic, so I'm especially interested to hear what you guys have to say about how you've dealt with stealth and surprise at your table, reactions to the conceptualizations that I work with, if you guys have something different that you work with, something you think might be better, more consistent, things that work better at your table with your particular play styles, I'd love to hear all of it. I would really love to get a conversation going down in the comments, and it's just good to be back making videos again. See you guys in the conversation. A poorer passive performance than passive poorer. A rural juror. A poorer